March 12, 2024. 23-year-old Marcus Johnson sat in the defendant's chair courtroom 4B, facing charges of armed robbery that could send him to prison for 15 years. Behind him, the gallery was empty except for his girlfriend Lisa. His mother was too ashamed to attend, and he had no other family to call for support. Marcus had grown up without a father, raised by his mother Angela in the roughest neighborhoods of Detroit. Angela had always refused to talk about Marcus's father, saying only that he made his choice and we made ours. Marcus had spent his childhood wondering what was so terrible about his dad that his own mother couldn't even speak his name. As the prosecution prepared to present their case, Marcus barely looked up when the lead prosecutor was introduced. District Attorney James Mitchell was known for his tough approach to crime and his perfect conviction record. Marcus assumed this was just another career criminal that Mitchell would destroy in court. But when Marcus finally raised his eyes to look at the man who would determine his fate, he saw something that made his blood freeze. The prosecutor had the same green eyes, the same facial structure, and the same distinctive scar above his left eyebrow that Marcus had inherited. District Attorney James Mitchell stopped mid-sentence as he looked at the defendant for the first time and saw his own face staring back at him from 23 years in the past. If this story touches your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And if this story moves you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to remember that family can be found in the most unexpected places. Your support helps us bring you these incredible true stories. Marcus Johnson had been born into a world where his father was already a ghost. Angela Johnson was 19 when she gave birth to Marcus, alone in a Detroit hospital with no family support and no resources except her determination to give her son a better life than she had known. Angela had always been vague about Marcus's father, but the few details she let slip painted a picture of a man who had abandoned them when faced with the responsibility of parenthood. He was young and scared, she would say when Marcus pressed for information. Some people aren't ready to be parents, baby. We're better off without him. Growing up without a father in Detroit's inner city meant Marcus was surrounded by other fatherless boys, but that didn't make the absence any less painful. He watched his friends get picked up from school by men they called dad, saw them at Little League games with fathers cheering from the stands, and wondered what was so wrong with him that his own father couldn't love him enough to stay. "Why didn't he want me, Mom?" Marcus had asked when he was 8 years old, after watching a father-son activity day at school from the sidelines. Angela's answer had been the same one she gave every time. "It's not about you, baby. It's about him not being man enough to handle being a father. That's his loss, not yours." But to Marcus, it felt like his loss every single day. He compensated for his father's absence by trying to be the man of the house, helping his mother with everything from grocery shopping to protecting her from neighborhood violence. Angela worked 2 jobs to support them, cleaning offices during the day and stocking shelves at night, and Marcus tried to be responsible enough for both parents. The combination of poverty, family stress, and growing up in dangerous neighborhoods had put Marcus on a path that seemed destined to lead to trouble. He was intelligent and had potential, but without positive male role models and with limited opportunities, Marcus began making choices that reflected his environment rather than his capabilities. By high school, Marcus was running with a crowd that saw illegal activities as their only path to financial stability. Angela tried to steer him away from the streets, but working 2 jobs left her little time to supervise a teenage boy who was angry about his circumstances and desperate to prove his worth. "Marcus, you're better than this," Angela would tell him during their increasingly frequent arguments about his behavior. "You don't have to let your father's abandonment define who you become." But Marcus couldn't separate his father's rejection from his own sense of worth. Every poor choice he made felt like proof that he was as worthless as his father had apparently believed. Every time he disappointed his mother, he heard an inner voice saying that this was why his father had left. Because even as a baby, Marcus hadn't been good enough to love. The armed robbery that landed Marcus in court had been a desperate attempt to get money for his mother's medical bills. Angela had been diagnosed with diabetes and couldn't afford her medications on her minimum wage jobs. Marcus had tried to find legitimate work, but his criminal record from previous minor offenses made it nearly impossible to find employment that paid enough to help his family. "I wasn't trying to hurt nobody," Marcus had told his court-appointed lawyer. I just needed money to help my mom, and I didn't know no other way to get it fast. The irony of Marcus's situation was devastating. The fatherless son who had turned to crime out of desperation to help his struggling mother was about to be prosecuted by the father who had abandoned them both, setting Marcus on this path in the first place. The moment when Marcus and James Mitchell recognized each other across that courtroom would shatter both their worlds and force them to confront 23 years of choices that had led to this impossible situation. The recognition between Marcus and James Mitchell was instant and mutual, but both men tried to convince themselves they were seeing things. The possibility that they could be father and son seemed too coincidental and too devastating to be real. James Mitchell had spent 23 years trying not to think about the son he had abandoned. When Angela Johnson told him she was pregnant during their brief relationship in college, James had been a pre-law student with dreams of becoming a prosecutor. The pregnancy felt like a threat to everything he had planned for his future. "I can't be a father right now," James had told 19-year-old Angela. "I'm trying to get into law school, and I can't handle the responsibility of a baby. Maybe you should consider other options." Angela's response had been firm. "I'm having this baby with or without you, but if you walk away now, don't come back later expecting to be part of his life." James had chosen his career over his son, convincing himself that Angela and the baby would be better off without him dragging them down. He had finished law school, built a successful career as a prosecutor, and eventually married a woman who couldn't have children. For 23 years, he had told himself that he had made the right choice. But looking at Marcus across the courtroom, James saw not just his own physical features, but the consequences of his abandonment reflected in a young man who had clearly struggled with poverty, lack of opportunity, and the kind of desperation that leads to armed robbery. Marcus was equally shaken by the recognition. The man prosecuting him had the face he saw in the mirror every morning, the same mannerisms he had inherited, and a successful career that Marcus had never believed was possible for someone like him. "Your Honor, I need a brief recess," James managed to say, his voice barely steady. During the 15-minute break, both Marcus and James sat in stunned silence, processing the impossible situation they found themselves in. Marcus was facing prosecution by the father who had abandoned him, while James was preparing to send his own son to prison. When court resumed, James Mitchell faced the most difficult ethical decision of his legal career. Protocol demanded that he recuse himself from the case due to conflict of interest, but doing so would require explaining his relationship to the defendant, something he had kept secret for over 2 decades. "Your Honor, I need to request a conference in chambers," James said, his composure barely maintained. In the judge's chambers, James Mitchell revealed the truth that would change everything. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that the defendant is my biological son. I haven't seen him since before he was born, but there's no question about the relationship based on physical resemblance and what I know about the timeline." The judge's response was swift. "Mr. Mitchell, you are immediately recused from this case. This situation will require careful handling to ensure the defendant's rights are protected." But the legal complications were nothing compared to the emotional reckoning that Marcus and James would have to face outside the courtroom. The hallway outside courtroom 4B would become the setting for a conversation that was 23 years overdue. But facing each other as adults would force both Marcus and James to confront the pain and anger that abandonment had created. The conversation between Marcus Johnson and James Mitchell took place in an empty hallway outside the courtroom, with both men struggling to find words for a situation that seemed impossible to navigate. "So you're my father," Marcus said, his voice flat with emotions he couldn't identify. "Yes," James replied quietly. "I think I am." The silence that followed was heavy with 23 years of abandonment, resentment, and questions that had never been answered. Marcus looked at the successful prosecutor who shared his face and felt a mixture of anger, curiosity, and devastating recognition of what his life might have been if this man had stayed. "Why?" Marcus asked simply. James's answer revealed the selfishness and fear that had driven his decision. "I was 22 years old and scared. I was trying to get into law school, and I thought having a baby would ruin my chances for success. I convinced myself that you and your mother would be better off without me." "Better off?" Marcus's anger began to surface. "You think we were better off? You think I was better off growing up without a father, wondering what was wrong with me that made you leave. James saw the pain his abandonment had caused reflected in his son's eyes, and for the first time in 23 years, he began to understand the true cost of his choice. Marcus, I was young and stupid and selfish. I thought I was protecting my future, but I didn't think about what I was doing to yours. My future? Marcus laughed bitterly. What future? I grew up poor, angry, and convinced I wasn't worth loving because my own father threw me away before I was even born. And now here you are, successful and respected, trying to send me to prison for crimes I committed because I never had the opportunities you chose over me. The confrontation continued as both men struggled with emotions they had been avoiding for decades. Marcus was angry about the poverty, the fatherless childhood, and the lack of opportunities that had led to his criminal activities. James was devastated by the realization that his son had become exactly what he had feared, a criminal defendant, partly because of the abandonment that had shaped Marcus's entire life. I know I don't have a right to ask, James said finally, but I want to help you now. I want to try to make up for the 23 years I missed. Marcus's response was swift and painful. Now? Now you want to be a father? When I'm sitting in a courtroom facing 15 years in prison. Where were you when I needed help with homework? Where were you when I was getting beat up at school for not having a dad? Where were you when my mom was working 2 jobs and I was raising myself? The conversation revealed the depth of damage that abandonment had caused, but also began a process of understanding that would eventually lead to healing for both men. The legal complications of a prosecutor discovering his son was the defendant would be nothing compared to the emotional journey both men would have to navigate to find their way back to each other. James Mitchell's recusal from Marcus's case created a media sensation when the story leaked to local newspapers. Prosecutor discovers defendant is his long-lost son became headline news, forcing both men to deal with public scrutiny on top of their private emotional turmoil. But the publicity also brought unexpected developments that would change the trajectory of Marcus's legal situation. Community organizations, civil rights groups, and legal advocates began examining Marcus's case more closely, questioning whether the charges against him were proportionate to his crime and whether his background of poverty and abandonment should be considered as mitigating factors. This young man's story represents everything wrong with our criminal justice system, said community activist Dr. Sarah Washington. A father abandons his son, condemning him to poverty and lack of opportunity. Then the same father tries to prosecute that son for crimes that might not have occurred if he had been present in his child's life. The new prosecutor assigned to Marcus's case, District Attorney Rebecca Torres, took a different approach than James Mitchell would have taken. She reviewed Marcus's background, his mother's medical situation, and the circumstances that had led to his desperate decision to commit armed robbery. This is a young man who made a terrible choice out of love for his mother and desperation about their circumstances, Torres explained to the court. While we can't excuse his actions, we can recognize the systemic failures and family abandonment that contributed to his situation. Meanwhile, Marcus and James began meeting regularly to try to build some kind of relationship from the wreckage of 23 years of separation. The conversations were difficult and often painful, but they were also necessary for both men to begin healing from the trauma of abandonment and guilt. I can't change what I did to you, James told Marcus during one of their meetings. But I want to understand who you became despite my absence, and I want to help you become who you're capable of being. Marcus was initially resistant to his father's attempts at reconciliation. You can't just show up after 23 years and expect everything to be okay, he said. I spent my whole life wondering what was wrong with me that my own father didn't want me. Now I find out you were building this great career while I was growing up poor and angry. But as they continued talking, Marcus began to see that James was genuinely remorseful about his choices and committed to making amends in whatever ways were possible. I know I can't be the father you needed as a child, James said, but maybe I could be the father you need as a man. Maybe I can help you build the kind of future I thought I was protecting when I left. The relationship between Marcus and James slowly began to evolve from mutual anger and pain towards something that might eventually become a form of healing and connection. Marcus's legal case would become secondary to the larger question of whether a father and son separated by abandonment and betrayal could find their way back to each other after 23 years of pain. The resolution of Marcus's legal case reflected the complex circumstances that had led to his crime. District Attorney Torres negotiated a plea agreement that acknowledged both Marcus's guilt and the mitigating factors in his background. Marcus pleaded guilty to robbery charges but received a sentence of 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory participation in job training and education programs. The sentence reflected recognition that Marcus's crime had been born of desperation rather than criminal intent, and that addressing the underlying causes of his behavior was more important than punishment. This young man deserves a chance to build a different kind of life, Judge Patricia Rodriguez said during sentencing. The circumstances that led to his crime, including the abandonment by his father, don't excuse his actions, but they do help us understand them and determine how justice can best be served. James Mitchell took responsibility for his role in creating the circumstances that had led to Marcus's criminal behavior. He testified during the sentencing hearing about his decision to abandon Marcus and Angela, and he committed to providing financial support for Marcus's education and job training. "I abandoned my son 23 years ago out of selfishness and fear," James told the court. "I can't undo that choice, but I can take responsibility for its consequences and try to help him build the kind of future I should have helped him achieve from the beginning." But more important than the legal resolution was the gradual development of a relationship between Marcus and James that neither of them had expected to be possible. Marcus began attending community college with financial support from James, studying business administration, and discovering academic abilities that had never been developed due to his challenging circumstances. He also began working at a nonprofit organization that helped at-risk youth, using his own experiences to connect with young people facing similar challenges. "Meeting my father in that courtroom was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me," Marcus reflected months later. "Worst because it forced me to confront all the pain and anger I'd been carrying. Best because it gave me a chance to finally understand that his leaving wasn't about me not being good enough. It was about him not being strong enough." James also underwent a transformation through his relationship with Marcus. He began volunteering with organizations that supported single mothers and fatherless children, trying to prevent other families from experiencing the kind of separation and trauma that had defined his own family story. "Finding Marcus changed my understanding of what success really means," James said. "I thought I was successful because I had built a career and accumulated professional achievements. But real success is about the relationships you build and maintain and the positive impact you have on the people who matter most." The courtroom where Marcus and James first met will become a symbol of both the justice system's failures and its potential for redemption when people are willing to face truth and accept responsibility. 1 year after their courtroom reunion, Marcus Johnson and James Mitchell appeared together at a conference about criminal justice reform, sharing their story as an example of how family abandonment contributes to crime and how restorative justice can help heal communities. "I want people to understand that every defendant in a criminal court has a story," Marcus told the audience. "My story involved growing up without a father and making desperate choices because I didn't see legitimate opportunities. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it explains why it happened." James added his perspective. "As a prosecutor, I spent years focusing on punishment without understanding the systemic failures that create crime. Meeting my son forced me to recognize that sometimes the people we're prosecuting are victims of circumstances that could have been prevented." Their presentation became part of a larger movement to reform criminal justice policies to address root causes of crime rather than focusing solely on punishment. Marcus and James became advocates for programs that support single-parent families, provide opportunities for at-risk youth, and help incarcerated individuals reintegrate into their communities. Marcus completed his community service by working with young people in situations similar to his own childhood. He discovered that his experiences with abandonment, poverty, and criminal justice gave him unique insights into helping other young men avoid the mistakes he had made. "I can't change my past," Marcus said, "but I can use it to help other people build better futures." James uses legal expertise to support organizations working on criminal justice reform and family stability. He also established a scholarship fund for children of single parents pursuing higher education. The relationship between Marcus and James continued to evolve and deepen as both men worked to heal from the trauma of their 23-year separation. They would never be able to recapture the father-son relationship they should have had during Marcus's childhood, but they built something new based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and commitment to helping other families avoid similar pain. We can't change the past, James reflected, but we can choose how to move forward from where we are now. 2 years after their courtroom reunion, Marcus Johnson and James Mitchell had built a relationship that neither of them could have imagined when they first recognized each other across that defendant's table. Marcus had completed his probation successfully and was finishing his bachelor's degree in social work while working full-time at a nonprofit organization serving at-risk youth. His transformation from desperate criminal defendant to community leader had been remarkable, but it had also been built on addressing the underlying issues that had led to his crime. My father's return to my life didn't magically fix everything, Marcus explained during a speaking engagement at a local high school. I still had to take responsibility for my choices and do the work to build a different kind of life. But having his support and guidance gave me resources I'd never had before. James had also been changed by his relationship with Marcus. He left his job as district attorney to work with a legal aid organization providing defense services for indigent defendants, many of whom reminded him of his son and the circumstances that had led to Marcus's criminal charges. Prosecuting cases taught me about the law, James said, but defending people taught me about justice. There's a difference, and my son helped me understand it. The relationship between Marcus and Angela Johnson had also been complicated by James's reappearance in their lives. Angela had spent 23 years as a single mother, and James's return forced her to revisit her own feelings about his abandonment and its impact on their family. I was angry for a long time, Angela admitted. Not just at James, but at Marcus for wanting a relationship with the man who abandoned us. But I realized that my son needed to make his own choices about forgiveness and family. Angela, Marcus, and James attended family therapy together to address the complex emotions and relationships that had been shaped by decades of separation and abandonment. The process was difficult, but ultimately healing for all three of them. Marcus married his girlfriend Lisa in a ceremony that was attended by both his parents, the mother who had raised him and the father who had returned to his life. The wedding became a symbol of how families can be rebuilt and healed even after devastating betrayals and separations. I never thought I'd have both my parents at my wedding, Marcus said during his reception speech. Growing up, I thought I was missing something essential because my father wasn't there. I learned that what I was really missing was the belief that I deserved love and opportunities. Now I have both parents, and I have the confidence to build the kind of life I always dreamed about. James's speech at the wedding acknowledged both his failures as a father and his gratitude for the second chance Marcus had given him. My son taught me that it's never too late to take responsibility for your mistakes and try to make amends. He also taught me that real success is measured by the people who love you, not the achievements you accumulate. Marcus and James now work together on criminal justice reform initiatives, sharing their story with other families affected by abandonment and incarceration. Their advocacy has contributed to policy changes that provide more support for single-parent families and alternative sentencing options for first-time offenders facing economic hardship. Our story isn't just about a father and son finding each other, James reflects. It's about how personal healing can contribute to social change when people are willing to face truth and work for justice. Marcus Johnson proved that even the most devastating family separations can be healed when people are willing to take responsibility for their choices and commit to building better relationships. His journey from abandoned child to criminal defendant to community leader demonstrates the power of second chances and the importance of addressing systemic issues that contribute to crime and family breakdown. The courtroom where I met my father was supposed to be the place where my life ended, Marcus concludes. Instead, it became the place where both our lives began again. If this incredible story of father and son reunion moved your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for families to heal and rebuild. Subscribe for more amazing stories of people who found their way back to each other against impossible odds. And comment below about your own experiences with family reconciliation or second chances.